Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this webinar on user access with the Horner OCS. It's roughly about 20 minutes, the presentation, but if you have any questions, you can drop them in at any point and we can get to them at the end.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be looking at user access in Horner OCS. Let's get started. We'll start with a review of the user access feature. Then we'll look at the difference between hard-coded user credentials and variable-based user credentials. We'll look at some of the WebMI limitations when it comes to the user access feature, and we'll also look at how to overcome these limitations. There will be demonstrations throughout, and we'll finish with a Q&A session. Let's review what we mean by user access or user security. This feature, available in some but not all OCS models, allows you to limit what an operator can see and control on the touchscreen or remotely through WebMI. Users receive credentials and must log in, either directly on the touchscreen or via WebMI, where they are then restricted in their viewing and operational capabilities. User access is only available on specific models through the touchscreen. This is limited to the X5 and the XL series starting from the XL4 and above, along with the entire XL Prime series. Additionally, the entire Canvas series will support this feature in the future. Horner OCS controls user access on an object level, allowing each object with an action, such as buttons for adjusting set points, starting or stopping motors, or changing screens, to be set with a specific access level. This approach is chosen for efficiency, as it avoids creating multiple similar screens for different operators. Instead, it ensures that multiple operators can view the same screen while limiting their ability to perform actions on certain objects based on their credentials. These actions include changing set points, toggling bits, or switching screens. Setting up access levels in Cscape is done during the screen configuration process. When you have an object with an action, double-click to access the configuration dialog, which includes an access button. Objects without any action do not have this feature. Within this access button, you can set an access level for that specific object, with the option to choose from up to 8 different levels. An access level of 0 implies no restrictions. Anyone can operate the object with full functionality. An access level of 7 means you need a user access level of 7 or higher to operate the object. To protect an entire screen, assign an access level to the jump object leading to that screen, or to limit specific operators from accessing it. During runtime, when an operator logs in, their access level defaults to 0 if they haven't logged in before. If they try to press a button with an access level higher than their authorized level, an access denied pop-up will appear on the screen, indicating that they lack the necessary access level to perform that function. In Cscape Setup, configuring user credentials is essential. You can do this within the Cscape graphics editor by accessing the Config menu, where you'll discover the user security configuration. Here you can input as many as 255 sets of credentials, with each set including a username of up to 16 characters and a password of up to 10 characters. You have the flexibility to enter these details as constants, meaning fixed usernames and passwords enclosed in single quotes, or as variable names, where the credentials are fetched from specific variables. Additionally, you may consider configuring a status register. While this configuration is optional, it can be quite useful. This status register provides information about which operator is currently logged in and the duration of their session, both for the local operator and for WebMI if the status register is set up to support WebMI as well. Lastly, for setup, you'll need to position a system login object on one of your project screens. This object allows operators to log into the system. In the graphics editor, find the password object, which we've highlighted in the upper right in red, and place it on the screen. In its dialog, choose User Access as the type. This will generate a system login object that you can resize as needed. So that's a brief overview of the user access or user security feature. Now we'll look at the new information we're sharing with you today. Previously, we primarily focused on hard-coded usernames and passwords, but now we'll look at the variable-based user credentials, not just the hard-coded ones. The advantage of hard-coded credentials is that they're simple to implement, conveniently set up within Cscape by typing them within single quotes. They're also the only credentials that WebMI can support. If you use hard-coded credentials, you can use the same ones for both WebMI and local touchscreen access. However, variable-based user credentials offer several benefits. They enable easier maintenance throughout the machine's lifecycle, allowing you to modify usernames, passwords, and access levels directly from the touchscreen without requiring Cscape. We'll look at how to achieve this. One limitation is that additional steps are necessary to integrate this approach with WebMI, and we'll cover those requirements later in the program. Now we'll look at how to implement variable-based user credentials in your project. Let's look at Cscape. Most of what we're doing for this feature is going to be done in the graphics editor. So the first thing is to open up the graphics editor for the project that's already been created. So now we'll look at some objects where we have to set the access level above the minimum of 0. So for machine setup, we don't want anyone to be able to go in and make setup adjustments to the machine. Here's a jump button that would take us to the machine setup screen. So if we double click on this, we can see that the access level was previously set to a level higher than 0, and we set it at a middle level of 4. So any user who wants to access that screen by pressing that button must have an access level of 4 or higher. We also did something similar with user admin, where you can go in and edit username and password. That's also set with an access level, but this time a bit higher, almost up to the maximum level of 7. Now again, the levels you set your objects at is up to you. You can leave everything at 0 if you don't want to implement the feature. But if you do implement the feature, you should at least set a few different levels of access for your project. Now we'll look at the specific user credentials and the way they're configured for this project. So we're in the config menu in the graphics editor and we go to user security configuration. And here you can see we have assigned what looks like about 11 different user credentials, sets of passwords, usernames and access levels, and most of them we've set as variables. So if we look here, what we have is a variable assigned for username, a variable assigned for password, and another variable assigned for access level. The username style variable we've assigned is a 16-byte array. The password style variable is also a byte array. For access levels, we used an integer type variable given that access levels are in the range of 0 to 7 as unsigned integers. We've created 10 sets of variables with various username credentials that can be changed at runtime being variables. We've also included one set of hard-coded user credentials. This serves as a fallback for when a project is initially loaded, ensuring that there's at least one hard-coded password to navigate through the touchscreen at the highest level. These hard-coded credentials are indicated by usernames and passwords enclosed in single quotes, while the access level is purely an integer. We've gone through different objects on various screens and assigned access levels higher than 0. Now we'll look at how this appears at runtime. On the home screen, it's evident that there's no user logged in, as indicated by the status register, which reports no logged in OCS user and 0 time elapsed. We'll proceed now with the login process. But before we do that, let's look at what happens when there's no user logged in. On the machine status screen, anyone can view it, even without logging in. However, attempting to start or stop the process or change the set point will result in denial because of insufficient security, given the protected access levels of the Start Process button and the Process Setpoint data field. We don't need to create a separate screen to display this process information. Now I'll attempt to access the user administration screen, but you can see that I don't have a sufficient access. Now we'll log in as the OEM, which is the highest level currently assigned. Let's go to the user login. Now you can see at the bottom that the new user is OEM. Going back to our status, we can see that the OCS user OEM has been logged in for 10 or 11 seconds. Now we'll look at how you can modify user credentials. Since we have the appropriate access level, we can do this on the user admin screen that we created. This is a standard Cscape screen featuring ASCII data fields that reference the username and password variables we've configured or intend to configure for this system. We've created 5 sets of user credentials on the left and another 5 that we haven't modified. If we wish to change the password for the operator, we can do so here. Everything is entirely editable at runtime, which makes this highly convenient. This is how we implement variable-based user credentials, setting them up as variables during Cscape configuration and creating a screen like the one we're showing you now, enabling you to edit them at runtime. Let's continue with more information on user access. Consider a scenario where we need a system in the factory to operate similarly to what we just demonstrated, with usernames and passwords that can be changed at runtime. However, we also want to utilize WebMI. How can we achieve both objectives without being confined to hard-coded usernames and passwords? Now we'll look at how we do this. To achieve this, you can't use the exact same Cscape file as in your OCS directly. Instead, you'll need to create a copy. One way to do this is by using the Save As option and saving it with a different name after your OCS project is complete and running smoothly. After making this duplicate copy, go into the hardware configuration. Change the target from the OCS running the runtime project to a selection called Web Designer. Then pick the resolution for the web pages you want to create for remote WebMI access. If your goal is to duplicate the screens you have in the OCS, choose a resolution with a similar aspect ratio to the one you're currently using. And then finally, in the duplicate project that you just created, you go in and change your credentials for user access from being variables to being all hard-coded. Now we'll look at the process of taking your project from what's running in your OCS to what you can run via WebMI. But instead of having variable-based type credentials, you're going to switch to those hard-coded credentials. Now we'll look at Cscape, and this time the first thing we want to do is create a duplicate of the project. So this is the project that's running in the OCS, and now we'll create a duplicate. One way we can do that is with a Save As, and we'll give it a name such as WebMI. So now we have a new project that we've called WebMI, and it's a duplicate of the existing project. The next step is to go to the hardware configuration, and then we need to change the device type, or the series if you will, from XL OCS series to Web Designer, and then we pick resolution. For this example, we're using an XL7 which has a wide aspect ratio, and so we'll pick a wide aspect ratio screen. Now we can go in and look at the screens that we'll see on WebMI. One thing you'll notice is that all the information is in the upper left hand corner. So if we want to fill the screen to make it look a bit better, we can do that manually. And then it's going to stretch everything out pretty well to cover the entire screen. So as we go through the screens here, you can see that we did a good job of adjusting the screens to be full screen. The next step is to go to Config and User Security and get rid of all these variable-based credentials and instead choose strictly hard-coded credentials. So we'll delete each of these users. And now we're left with strictly one hard-coded password. We want a lot more than that, but for now we'll add one in here, and we'll add one called production. And if it's hard-coded, the username and password need to be between single quotes. So let's go with this for a password, and we'll say it's access level 6. And then we could add more. Again, these are hard-coded, but you could have lots to choose from that you could assign to specific users logging in remotely. So now that's done, it's just a matter of going into the WebMI menu and we'll publish to removable media and then manually copy these files over to the OCS. So we have a message here that says everything's been completed successfully. Now if we hadn't changed over the user credentials to fixed, this is where we would have that error message. Now this is the stage where we would copy the WebMI folder to the root directory of the micro SD card running in the XL7, and we already did that earlier. So now we're going to look at the web browser and we'll navigate to the OCS's IP address. We'll type in the credentials here and sign in. And once we accept the license and press continue, we now have the full support to the project on the OCS, and still locally on the touchscreen have the ability to maintain all those login credentials through variables and change them as many times as we'd like throughout the life of the machine. So that's what we wanted to look at today, adding a bit of extra information to user access, and that is how you would deal with variable-based user credentials versus the strictly hard-coded ones. That concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much for listening, and the Q&A session will begin shortly.
Okay, hopefully that was of benefit to you. We are back again in 2 weeks. We are off next weekend. It'll be every 2 weeks until after Christmas. So in 2 weeks' time, it will be implementing WebMI. So if you have interest in that, then the link is on the website as usual. Other than that, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again.